sufficiency is an essential component of well-being, so we will be nicely sufficient here. We will just use 2 of the 3 chairs because Karen is leaving for Zurich. I am Sascha Nick, so I'm a professor of sustainability at Business School Lausanne and senior scientist here at EPFL working on societal transitions.
I'm Ange Martin, a PhD student at the University of Lausanne. I'm working on societal change and socio-technical transitions, specifically on energy communities.
And there was a last-minute emergency, which is why Ange has kindly accepted to replace Julia, who cannot come here tonight. So the way we will organize the next 58 minutes or so we keep the timing, is that we will provide a very short introduction, a few minutes each, with just some examples why democracy might be useful or positive. And after that, we will ask you to discuss 2 questions in groups of about 3 or 4 for about 10, 12 minutes. And that result, then we share what you have discussed in groups, and then we'll try to bring it to some kind of meaningful conclusion altogether. So it's going to be very interesting if you participate. It's going to be boring if you watch other people talk. Okay. Who of you thinks that democracy is a good way to govern a society? Please raise your hand. Okay. Who of you thinks that the owners of a company, that is the shareholders, should be able to decide what exactly the company does, what resources it uses, to what purpose and how? Raise your hand. If you think that the owners or shareholders of a company should be able to decide that. Okay, that's about half. That's unusual. Usually we get 100% for the first question and about 80% for the second. Of course, the second one is incompatible with the first, which is kind of interesting. We have a lot of democracy at different levels, but not in the company. And workplace democracy is a big topic, which we will indirectly discuss if you bring it into your group discussion. So the kind of big societal changes that we need, I will give you just 2 examples and a quick element of solution before passing on to Ange to give you additional examples. If we think of aviation, there is no technological solution for sustainable aviation. Sustainable aviation is a much smaller aviation, perhaps dividing the number of flights by 7, based on some research we published 2 years ago. If we have 1/7 of the flights in the future that we have now, how do we allocate those flights? Do we sell them off at an auction, so the richest guy buys as many flights as he wants, the second richest buys the remaining ones, and then nothing is left? Do we put them on a lottery, or do we have some kind of democratic decision-making process? I don't know what the answer is, but there are probably other possibilities you could allocate. You could auction off half the tickets, and then that makes the other half free, and then you can allocate them democratically. You can imagine all sorts of things. But another topic which is even more important is not how we decide, but how we think about important things. Who thinks that there is a shortage of apartments in Lausanne? Please raise your hand. Okay, and in Geneva? Okay. The shortage of apartments is a societal discourse. Everybody is repeating this from the morning until the evening. You find it in every newspaper, every journalist, every politician, etc. There is a reason why we have this discourse. It is not because it corresponds to reality. As a matter of fact, our analysis, a systems-level analysis, shows that we have twice as many square meters in Switzerland compared to the population we have today. They are not necessarily well used, many are empty, there's a lot of inequality, some of them are in bad shape, etc. But there's no shortage. There are too many apartments in bad shape, used by too few people for the wrong purpose. Okay, that's a very different discourse. Why does the first discourse exist? You know Antonio Gramsci. Who has read Gramsci? Okay. Gramsci established that the source of power, if I simplify many smart things he said, is not with people, not in people with guns to control others, or even with money. It is if you can control thoughts. So you have a dominant thinking that is presented as common sense. So of course, I can't rent an apartment unless I'm very rich. So obviously there's a shortage. So this is obviously common sense. And of course, this is self-serving for a whole industry that makes a lot of money this way, etc. Okay, so in this case, the question is, how do we engage democracy so people actually learn enough about the topic and actively question something to see what is even the problem? How do we define the problem? Because that will define, of course, what we do about that. And then how do we decide how we govern buildings and so on? And then finally, just an example of what works very, very well, the kind of democracy. We tend to make an intellectual shortcut by saying democracy is everybody can vote. But voting is 1% of democracy. 99% of democracy is learning about the topic enough so that you can meaningfully engage in the debate of it, and then the debate itself, the deliberation. And those two things are 99%. And we don't have that in Switzerland, and we don't have that in many other countries. We have the voting, but that's 1%. So where that works really well are citizens' assemblies. And they have been done in many countries, including in places where you wouldn't expect them, like in China. The results are, when it's well organized, always very, very good, in the sense that there's a meaningful debate, people learn about the topic, and they engage in the topic based on their knowledge, but also values and lived experience. Those two last ones is something that an expert cannot bring. An expert can bring knowledge. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that we need to do at a large scale. So, Ange, would you like to give some other examples before we ask you questions? We are not trying to give you answers. We are just trying to inspire you to think about some topics.
Yeah, exactly. In the same way, I would like to mention one of the societal challenge kind of mentioned by Sascha a couple of minutes ago, the energy transition. The energy transition is happening. I guess you are all aware of that. And we are moving from a system in which we had a very much centralized system with big scale, from a system which is much more decentralized and small scale. This allows for different kind of governance models. And an example of this are energy communities. Energy communities are systems...
Energy communities, for those, yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Energy communities are systems in which citizens gather and decide to collectively produce renewable energy. Through these energy communities, people can be also owner of the system, which entails that they can take choice and they can be included, and they can also share the benefits of selling electricity. Of course, new models of governance implies principles for this to be implemented correctly. Some of those principles are transparency, inclusion, and there are many others. But I have an example where inclusion was not considered, which led to a couple of problems. So I'm working on this energy community in Geneva, and when the city decided to build the system in which people were going to live, they didn't really consult the citizens, and they didn't ask for their opinion, their needs, or whatever. And however, they built a very efficient system, technically wise. As of now, we see that the consumption of electricity and of water is very much higher than what they would expect, despite the high standard in the building. Therefore, this kind of shows that it's important to integrate the citizens and really understand what are the needs and fit the technical solution to the needs. However, this also is the question mentioned by Sascha before. We need to models like citizen assembly for the citizens to be aware of this technology and give an informed opinion. I have another example from Senegal this time. And in this case, we are talking about access to electricity. An NGO was working in a rural community in Senegal in which people do not have access to electricity. So they decided to install systems of solar panels for people to have access to electricity, but they just installed the solar panels and didn't really wondered about any other use. They just considered the residential one. And then they realized that the demand was very low, and they were wondering why. And in the end, they discovered that, of course, people wouldn't have the money to afford other appliances, so they couldn't consume more. And when they went on really in the field, they saw that people, these are rural communities, so the main source of income is agriculture, and the economy is very informal. So they saw people pouring milk on the ground, and they wouldn't understand why. And when they talked to people, people told them that they had just like too much milk, but they didn't have the machines that would allow them to transform milk into something else. So when they realized this, they bought machines and installed the machines. So this at the same time increased the demand, increased the well-being of people, and gave them a source of income because they could sell the milk, they could transform it and do something else out of it. So as Sascha mentioned before, democracy is not just vote. It's much more complex than this, and there are much more dimensions to integrate. So I'll leave the floor to Sascha for you to start thinking about the questions.
Do you have any questions so far before we form the groups and we ask you the questions that you will answer as a group? Yes. You just need to speak up a bit, please.
What do you think is the role of the cities and the commune to facilitate this kind of citizens' participation? What is the role of the cities?
Well, in a sense, the citizens should give the commune or the city a role. Now, in today's political system, that's the only level of governance that we have at the local level. But at some point, if we want a deeper transformation, the citizens should decide what is decided at the neighborhood level, what is decided at the communal level, etc. And ultimately, it should probably be much more than what it is today, because today we have the cantons that have a lot of power. The Confederation is really focused on a very small number of things, but almost everything is decided at the cantonal level. And many of these things could be probably better decided at the local level. And this is actually a nice question because it leads to what I will ask you to do in the groups. But before I ask you the questions, can you please form groups of 3 or 4? If you're more than, yeah, and you can move the chairs, you can turn around or something so you can actually talk to each other. Just let's make sure that we know who is in which group. And if you are more than 4 or less than 3, please go to some other group. Okay? You can move around as much as you want. That's a special group with a microphone. Okay. Does everybody have a group? Well, if it's a group of 3, you can join them. If, you're a group of 3. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so everybody has a group. Good. You have already started discussing, but would you mind hearing the question that you should discuss? Okay, so there are 2 questions. Okay, I guess some groups don't even need the questions. They can just discuss, which is fine. That's a nice thing when you put people in groups. Okay, so think of a sector. Could be food, could be housing, could be mobility, could be making clothes, could be local energy production, could be repairing stuff. Just think of some sector of society. Okay? And think of how you could make it democratic. What are the kinds of things that you would like to see in that particular sector? So think at a relatively local level. How local, that depends on the thing you're thinking about. If it's housing, it can just be a few buildings. If it's food, it's probably a little bit bigger. If it's energy, it's probably even a little bit bigger because you need to think of biodiversity and connectivity and stuff like that. So the exact scale will depend on what you choose. I'm not telling you what it is, but it's relatively local. And think of what kind of, it can be production, producing anything, producing shirts or something. Just think of some sector that you care about, or that you can somehow agree that you care about, and try to describe in a few sentences. You can write it down, because we'll share afterwards. Try to think of what kind of, how would you bring democracy into it? Democracy, not just in terms of voting, but so the people inform themselves, they debate, deliberate, and then they can make some kind of decision. Okay? So, what is it that you would like to see in this democratic governance of whatever sector you have chosen? And what is it that we should avoid? What is it that you think is problematic and we should avoid? Okay, so it is 35. Let's try to start sharing at around 45. So we have still enough time afterwards to bring everything together. Is this okay? Okay. If someone's completely confused, just come and see us here. Yeah. I will kindly ask every group just to tell us what you worked on. The topic that you worked on.
Water management.
Sorry, water management.
Food production.
Okay, food production.
We also have food
Okay.
distribution.
Food distribution and food production. Anyway, we're getting closer to dinner. I see. I see the motivation to work on food. Okay. What did you work on?
Building sector.
I'm sorry.
Building sector. Housing.
Housing. Okay. Okay. Very good.
Health.
And health. Wonderful. Well, we cover many of the provisioning systems for essential needs. So if we can collectively save the world. Okay. Shall we just go around and ask every group to share one idea? Well, you'll have a chance to speak more, but we have to start somewhere. Who would like to share one idea?
Yes, sir. To agree between consumer and producer which crops, livestock will be produced every year, in which quantity and at which prices. Like in the first step, like propose 3 kind of programs and with a reduced amount of people randomly selected among the consumers. And then in the second step, informing everybody about the proposed programs, and so everybody can vote for which program they want. Okay. So you're proposing to have a panel, small panel of food eaters, discuss what, or make a number of proposals, and then everybody would vote on that. Agreeing with the producer in which like technical conditions or what the conditions they can produce. Those panels will be
Okay.
including both sides.
Okay. So the proposals are made by consumers and producers together, and then the whole population chooses among a certain number of proposals.
Exactly.
Okay. Other examples, please? Ideally, every group would share one idea, and then we'll build on that.
Do you have an idea here?
We have, let's say, a hard-to-abate sector, health. So we mostly reason on where the democratic process.
Okay. May I just ask, why do you have the impression that health is hard to abate?
I mean, hard to democratize. I mean, to think decentralized. Let's say, not to. I didn't want.
Okay.
I mean, now it's so centralized that thinking it decentralized is a big step.
Yeah, indeed, it's a very centralized sector, but thinking in a decentralized way is not hard, is it? Or I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not picking on this, but I just have the impression that you may be coming from a certain discourse which we might want to challenge.
Yeah, I'm starting from the status quo.
Okay, yeah.
And given the status quo, it's one of the, I would say, toughest sector where you can actually install a democratic process.
Okay, so what are you proposing?
Exactly. So we're proposing to, again, introduce this democratic procedure deliberation into defining minimum health standards that should be guaranteed by some common fund, and also confidentiality, privacy regulations. Okay. This could be something that is highly personal and needs to be agreed collectively.
Okay, and just a question on minimum health standards. Is it minimum standards how healthy people should be, or minimum standards what the healthcare system should provide?
More the second. Yeah.
Okay, and why did you choose?
Some preventive action, curative action, and yeah.
Okay. Let's move on.
It's our friendly.
Okay.
Yeah, we were thinking at food supply on a local level, and we're thinking of in neighborhoods to have like a deliberative process that decide the source and the kind of supply chain, and that the food that are in the end get distributed goes into the shelf should arrive at. So to have like a gathering of people that live in a neighborhood and make I don't know, has a reference to their process to decide which kind of supply chain they should follow in order to have their food on the shelf of the shelf.
Now, I'm not quite sure I really understand the difference to the other food group. So you're speaking on the supply side. So you're proposing that the suppliers somehow democratically get together to propose what they will produce.
Where I think that our proposal is more like the demand for like gathers together to decide what kind of supply they should get. Is like to embed the supply and demand process.
Mm-hmm.
So another way of saying it is procurement standards.
Mm-hmm.
So the community will have, for example, a local shop, and the community will decide what are the procurement standards for that shop. So it will not procure in a certain way, it will procure in another way. And they will decide about that together.
Okay, but who would decide on what food is being produced and eaten?
Then we would look at if there was a real situation, like where I live, Ponchon, there's one shop, épicerie, so they would look at the supply, there's the farmers markets, there's, I don't know, you can buy things from Nestle if you want, but if the community says we don't want the Nestle products, we want the community products, then it will only be community products.
Okay.
Then there has to be an owner. I mean, obviously, I don't know, somebody has to manage the whole thing.
Right, okay.
But that's the next step.
Okay, so basically, customers of that shop would get together democratically, and instead of everybody buying what they want, they would decide, well, we want to buy A, B, and C, and we don't want to buy D and E.
For example.
Okay.
To some extent, this can apply to the distribution group as well, because now the decision power is concentrated by a few managers of the group that want to please the shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
So they will take their decision based on the profit and not the quality of the food. If we can move this decision power to the consumers in a democratic way, they will take into account not only the profit, but also the quality of the food for them, for the baby, and maybe also the impact of the food and the change in the diversity and so on. But for that, democracy can be a good tool, but only if we can bring some transparency, some education to the people, and give them enough power, I don't know, open the shareholder to the consumers.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess what you're proposing to add, of course, consumers today already decide what food they buy. And then, of course, if everybody bought one thing, then that will be more supplied. And if people stop buying a certain number of things, those things wouldn't be supplied after a while. But because this is all very individual, there's no deliberation and there's no collective action. And then in the end, everything keeps being supplied. And then the price signals, of course, we know that they don't correspond neither to health nor to environmental impact nor anything else. Okay. I'm starting to understand. Okay, what else? Housing. What are you proposing?
Okay, so we are proposing to promote democracy in the, let's say, housing sector by promoting the social sense and the transparency and allocating, fairly allocating people into the existing housing by taking into account maybe their income, if they have a family, or if they are like a monofamily. So for instance, I'm connecting it to one of the first panels that we had today. If we have just an elderly person living in a really big apartment, really 4 rooms apartment, and he or she is living by himself, we can just put maybe 4 people living there according to their income and their needs. So it would be like the fair allocation and promoting also the transparency. If they, for instance, say, this is my financial situation right now, I can also maybe promote this sense of community and saying, okay, I'm aware of other needs, maybe I can share my flat or share my space with others to make like a better community, to improve also the well-being, because they will have more money to destinate to another things.
Right. Okay. We definitely need to come back to that, but first.
Yeah. So our topic was water management, and we had to kind of set the boundaries of our framework, because if you just start thinking, okay, what if we are a city? There's 20 things, 20 factors coming into play, and we wouldn't get anywhere. So we said, okay, let's assume we are like a lost, isolated village in the mountains, and so that's kind of our framework, the system we're considering. steering.
Okay.
And so for us, I mean, the idea of democracy is that we gather together to make some decisions on how we want to manage this resource, water. And so the first point that came up to us was that the people should make an informed decision. As you mentioned before, it's important that people are aware of what are the different types of use of water. And so for us, an important part was that some people should kind of advocate and explain what are the different types of use of water, what are the potential related risks, and alternative solutions if they fail to get enough of this resource for their use. So for us, that was like the first step, to have people explaining in the most objective way why do we need water, and yeah, what are the risks and alternative solutions if they don't have enough water allocated for that specific use.
Did you discuss the fact that Switzerland, one of the most water-rich countries in the world, actually imports 82% of its water?
How much did you say?
82%. So Switzerland is probably the most water-rich country, or the second most water-rich country in Europe, yet it imports 82% of its water as virtual water in all the food that it imports.
Go ahead, please.
So the average Swiss person consumes 4,200 liters of water per day, most of it for food, and 82% of that is imported. And much of it is imported from very dry places that have no water at all. Now, should that be part of the water management in your commune?
No, because we are an isolated community. Most about is like weird. We don't know there are people existing outside.
Okay, but is the community importing food, or is it self-sufficient in food?
No, but that's exactly the point, like why water management and like you need to have an informed decision, why, I mean, I'm not sure about these figures, but I guess that maybe that's something to do with how reservoirs are operated and like how we can actually access this water resource, and this is why water management is needed and why different points of view needs to be explained. For example, yeah, we assume we are in a village in Switzerland, let's say, and like there are dams like smaller or bigger, like pretty everywhere. So assuming that this is one kind of stakeholder in the water management, they would have to present their point of view, and at the same time, I don't know, someone that like cattle owners rather than, I don't know, someone that has a hotel for tourists, or like the normal citizen that just like needs water for their own like private needs. And this is like why different points of view needs to be explained, because maybe like someone says, okay, let's consume less water, who cares about the cattle, but then like you have to think about like how actually everybody benefits from the cattle, and in the same way how the reservoir is operated actually impacts even other people. And that's why before like having a democratic choice, you need to be sure that people are kind of aware of what's going on, and why would someone advocate for a water management strategy that is different than their own.
Right. Okay, I'm getting it. Okay, I have a question to all groups, perhaps at this stage. Did you just assume that everything would be regulated by the market and go through the market, or are you considering that some sectors should be removed from the market? Who considered this question? Do you want to share?
When we say that the minimum standard should be provided by common financing, it means that it's removed from the market.
Right. Okay.
So we didn't explicitly talk about the market, but implicitly, yes.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned also some kind of means testing, etc. So it would still be somehow in the market, but people would be more solidary or something in the way they use the resources. Or did I misunderstand? How do we deal with big changes? Our big topic here is, of course, the preconditions for required radical change. So, shall we take a moment to talk about food, and then we can go to the other topics. Two of you worked on food, and of course most water is used for food production as well, even in Switzerland. So you're really working almost on the same topic. So of course what we have today is Switzerland produces about half of its food theoretically, but in practice it produces actually only 25% of its food. So of the 50% that it produces, 25% are exported. And then what is imported is 75% of what people actually eat. So if you're an average person, 75% of what you eat is imported. And then there are some exports of other stuff. So if we wanted a resilient, sustainable system that we would need to reconfigure, we would need to produce about twice as much food and probably significantly reduce imports and exports. And probably produce something very different, because whatever is growing today will not grow when the temperature goes up another 4 degrees or whatever. And then we are already using far too much space in terms of biodiversity. So we actually need to produce twice as much food with less space and less intensity, etc. So it's really a very, very radical change. Now, obviously that means it can't be industrial agriculture, monoculture, pesticide, fertilizer, etc. So it needs to be produced more like some kind of permaculture, regenerative agroecology, etc. How would you move to that? How would this process that you are envisaging going to enable that? I mean, we're not talking about small changes. We can slightly improve certain things, and we could get the local shop to sell from the local cooperative and not from Nestle. That would be an improvement, but that would not be the kind of required radical change that we are trying. Yes, and then you, Geneva, yes.
So one of the things that were mentioned was that since we get farmers talking to each other, we can also distribute who does what, so that not every farmer does everything. Not every farmer has chickens and so on and so forth. And on that scale, one of my first questions when you told us all these numbers, is it that bad that we import food? Like, we can do the same system on an even larger scale. We say, well, in Switzerland you can grow carrots really well, because I've been talking about carrots for the last half an hour. And so some other food grows, I mean, bananas grow a lot better elsewhere, so why is it that bad that we import food? If we just say we make sure that everything is represented, we produce it in a smart way, and then we can distribute it sensibly.
Right. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. A highly integrated system is less resilient. And if communities produce for the market as opposed to producing for their own nutrition, you break a very essential link, and that is what Mark Bittman in his wonderful book, Animal Vegetable Junk, called suicidal. So producing for the market, breaking the link where the community produces for itself to some kind of anonymous market is actually quite a dangerous thing. Now, you could have some kind of long-term relationship, and if you could somehow ensure that under all sorts of disruptions, the supply chain would somehow work, perhaps you could do that. But what you could also do is simply, I like this example of bananas, because of course, unless we have really bad climate change, we won't have bananas in Switzerland. But that's just a matter of 10 years, I guess, in terms of climate change. Okay, but what we could do is once a year we import a few containers of bananas to Switzerland, and then we have a banana festival for 2 weeks, and everybody loves bananas. And after that, for the rest of the year, there's no bananas, and people eat something else. I'm not sure what to do with coffee or cocoa, etc. But I mean, the point is, in a resilient system doesn't mean you don't import anything. It means that if the imports break down for some reason, you can still live decently. So that limits. I guess if you have 80% of the food for a few months, you're probably going to be fine. but if you have 25% of the food for a few months, you probably won't be fine. So I think that's the limitation. But Genevieve had a question.
I don't have an answer to your question, but I was just, I mean, from my humble experience, I think that what really can bring some change is, and it's the leitmotif of today's event, is really participation and collective thinking. And I don't know, in my humble experience, whenever I joined the group, my energy was amplified more than linearly, was really like exploded, and it happened only with the people I could empathize with.
Right.
And so very small level, very small scale, but at least, I don't know, at least 40 people I know. I could feel this let's say, amplification of my energy. And I think this is really key if we want to do some change. And really, I think today we kind of slalomed around answering this question on the how, like how to do all these nice things, how to really bring democratic principles into our daily lives and into these enormously impactful sectors such as the food system, housing, etc. Yeah, like I think the question remains, we all agree on the fact that we really need these practices. The question is how to scale up, how to really convince people to think about their goals as a society or as a neighborhood, as a neighborhood. I really, of course, I don't have an answer, but I think this is where we should kind of puncture people and really question ourselves.
Does anyone have an answer to Geneviève's question, which is excellent? Well, yes.
I think we need leadership skills, and leadership skills is also about listening to people and letting them talk and to brainstorm and to ideate and not having the critical comments right away. Because once we start to criticize an idea, everyone goes into the fear mode and they're afraid to talk.
Yeah.
So it's very important to have the right leadership skills, basically, in every single session, every single brainstorming session, every single community meeting where people have to talk together. The trust is the key, because if people trust each other, then they can work together.
Yeah.
So the leadership skills to create trust.
But don't people naturally create trust if you just leave them? And if you stop telling them that they're individualists and individual consumers and they should maximize their utility function and all that? If we just stop telling them these things, they will perhaps just... I mean, I'd just like to share a piece of experience. We did in October an academic citizens assembly at the University of Lausanne on the topic of transforming the Swiss food system, so to preserve biodiversity and health. And what came out of this is that, of course, we need to move to agroecology and actually very big variation in the kind of things we grow. And, of course, all of that is very labor intensive. And we estimated that instead of paying 6% of the average income in Switzerland for food, it might go up to 20 or 25% or something. And that is fine for some people to pay much more. And for some people, it may not be fine to pay much more, but it may be fine to actually spend a few weeks volunteering in food production. So that then they don't necessarily pay more, but they actually contribute some labor to that. And actually, one of the discussions was to create a labor pool. You know, a little bit like we do the army, etc., where you have some kind of mobilization for food production. Now, that's quite a noble thing. I think it's much more noble to mobilize labor for food production than for killing someone else with your army. But the interesting thing is this was the outcome of a citizens' assembly where people discussed. So, are you tired? Do we want to talk a few more minutes about housing? Or health or something else? I'm sorry?
I would keep it in 15 minutes though, because we need to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can conclude any time, or we could spend all night debating. Okay, let's try perhaps just to take one more example. Is that okay for everyone? Okay. So the, if we think in terms of, we can perhaps combine housing and health as a common question, so that we try to we kind of cover the three groups discussing food, and then we build on the two of you. So of course the topic we have in housing, we have enough square meters, but they're poorly used, and many of them are in poor shape. 1% of Swiss buildings is energy class A. That means 99% is not class A, and they somehow need to be renovated. But it's not just renovating buildings so that they're properly insulated. It's also renovating how we use spaces internally, so they are flexible, and we have some shared spaces, and families reconfigure all the time. All of our apartments are made for a family of 2 parents and 2 young children, and only 20% of the population corresponds to that, and everybody else has some kind of other configuration. And of course, that's also changing, etc. So we don't need to replace one fixed model by another fixed model. We need to replace the obsolete fixed model by a flexible model. So we need to think how to change the flexibility of spaces, but we also need to think about neighborhoods. So what are the functions we want to have in every neighborhood? And one of the key functions is precisely to have a local medical center. So Switzerland doesn't need 280 hospitals that it has. Switzerland needs, Switzerland is 9 million people. 9 million people is a medium-sized city in any big country. And a medium-sized city will have 5 hospitals. There's no reason for Switzerland to have more. But there's a reason to have 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 local community centers, medical centers, where people will get whatever they need locally. They can walk there in 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and they know the doctor and they know the nurse, etc. So how do we democratically get together and decide we want to renovate our neighborhoods, and we want to have a medical center, and we want to have a community cultural center, and we want to have a food center, and this and that? And how do we do that? How do we start the process in a political system where the commune doesn't really own many buildings and might not care, and all the buildings are somehow owned by some private investors, many individuals, some companies, some belonging to some kind of investment funds, etc. How do we move that? How do we get that started? I think if you ask people, sit down in a group like this and imagine your neighborhoods, 2,000 people, a few buildings, etc. How would you like to organize it? Where would you like to have your doctor? Where would you like to have your this and your that? People will come up with all sorts of ideas, and then hopefully they could agree on something. But how do you actually get started? Yes?
Someone brings initiative, you start something. In my community we have a lot of politics going on, and people do come regularly to the assembly every half year, and so as soon as you should start something, and then,
okay.
Then people come. I guess it's more the activation energy to say.
So you really just need a few people to get started and organize a debate about it. And then you move to a more structured process. Because I have organized many of these debates in different communes. We had a debate on palm oil in Plevrange 2 weeks ago. Then we had a debate in Bulle about urbanism and urban sprawl and how to preserve the character. And then we have one in Roll in a few weeks on nutrition, precisely. So actually organizing a debate is not that hard, and lots of people come, and it's all very interesting, and you get usually a sponsor and some nice food and wine, and all of that is very nice. But what is very hard then is to move from that to actually something changing. You get the local journalist, and then he or she writes a nice article, and the people read that and say, bravo, we had a great time, and then nothing happens.
I guess you need to kind of reach a critical mass.
Yeah. Like this happening in enough communes, or enough people within one commune joining it?
I think both.
Yeah.
Happening in enough communes and kind of talking to each other. I mean, that have some communes that have some connections between them.
Right.
They're not isolated.
Yeah.
Also, you also need some kind of authority at this, like organize for a large scale. If you want to be more efficient and if you have more authority, you have more way to act, like to communicate to more people at the same time. Because if I'm alone, I don't know how to reach all my neighborhoods except just by knocking on their door and spending a lot of time. But if I work with the commune, I can just tell them they can make a communication to everybody, and they have the authority to do that.
You could, but if you don't have that, you will just go to say a few shopkeepers, or you will go to some local company that knows people, or you will go to an association of citizens that meet occasionally on some other topic, or to a local sports club.
But then if you want to make the changes, actually, you need
Yeah.
organizations.
Yeah, that is right.
If I can add on that, I think it also depends on the issue. Whenever it involves infrastructures, for example, then of course you would need the intervention of the city, municipality. But I also think that in other situations, for example food, it can really be local and grassroots.
Could we somehow bring more democracy to EPFL, to both education at EPFL and also making decisions about the campus and stuff we do here on a daily basis?
It could be more democratic, like students and also like the community in general could be more involved.
We need to know what's going on, because for instance, like in that case, I live close by and I have no idea of what's going on. So I think that, for instance, if we really want to do like a change for something and we want to shift some goals, like everyone needs to be like in the same let's say channel to like really increase this willingness to participate and to come up with something.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is that like as you were mentioning, like one would need to know what's going on, and again like the thing about being informed to be able to make decisions about something. The problem is that if we really want to push democracy to what should ideally be, one would need to be informed about just about everything to be able to make decisions about just about everything and actually enable democracy in its widest sense. However, this is not feasible, not even in the smallest community, because like, again, like these sectors are just like a part of everything that like we deal with in our daily lives. So then I think the question should be like, how much do we actually need to be informed and make decisions individually to actually have it working? Because for sure it's not possible to know everything about health, water, food, housing, and so on. So,
Well, how many important decisions are there in any place? The Swiss Parliament makes 2,000 decisions every year, but most of these are not very important decisions. How many really important ones there are? So you can't make democratically a decision on 2,000 things every year. That's impossible. But perhaps you can make one important decision every year, or two important decisions every year, and then you take time to learn about those two things.
I mean, this is the representation then, like you just vote and this is the important decision you make and you're trusting people to represent you and your perspective on other decisions.
Sure. And you can ask yourself how well it's working.
I mean, it's not working well, but I don't know about the alternatives. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well,
Actual system, when you those informations because they are given.
Right. So of course, today's democracy, you vote four times a year, on four different Sundays. You get some information booklet. That information booklet, depending on the topic, is somewhere between 5 and 60% true. If you're an expert, you will know which parts to trust and which, but then you don't need it, of course. So of course, the issue is how are these things written. But even if they were well written, there were some examples where there were initiatives to rewrite that information booklet better, and that's an improvement. But what is more important is that people actually learn about it. And learning doesn't just mean sending a booklet to people who are not used to reading these things. I mean, we as scientists know what to do with a written piece of information. Most people don't really know how to properly understand it. So you need some kind of information sessions around that, discussions with others, etc. But much more importantly, you need the next phase where people deliberate. And that is completely missing. The information booklet is sent with varying quality, and then the misinformation campaign starts. And on most issues, both sides oversimplify and are not entirely true, but some sides tend to oversimplify and twist the truth much more than others, unfortunately. But there's no deliberation at all. People retreat in their echo chambers and nothing works. And sometimes you're lucky, and the day was nice and enough people voted or didn't vote, and somehow the outcome happens to be okay. But you can't govern a country based on luck. You need a process that will reliably produce something good. I mean, we had some good votes. We voted for the electricity law, which is nice. We voted for the second or third try. We voted for some kind of climate law, etc. But then the pesticide thing was rejected, and the biodiversity protection was rejected, and the planetary boundaries were rejected. So many of these things get rejected without people even understanding what they're talking about. And others get accepted. For example, the motorway extension got accepted, but that's pure luck. This was not, and sometimes you're lucky, and we can be happy about that, and still have a glass of wine and celebrate, which is nice. But we need to design a process that's going to work. And there are not that many decisions. I mean, what are we talking about? We are talking about how do we use the territory at a larger scale. What parts shall humans use in some kind of capacity, and what shall we leave for biodiversity? We are looking at every single commune. How do we use the space? Well, the buildings we have, the open spaces between the buildings, what do we need there? Who should be given access to what? That's quite important. Obviously about food, perhaps some big sectors like health. More, how do we ensure that we are healthy, and not how do we ensure that we have lots of doctors? And the two are slightly different, even though of course they're linked. So there are not that many decisions. I think with 10 decisions, you could move the country from suicidal to high well-being within planetary boundaries. And you could make those 10 decisions in 5 to 10 years. We could even make a list of what those decisions are and define the questions for the assembly that will provide some kind of answer. And each of them could have multiple answers. In the end, it doesn't matter whether you put the doctor here and the grocery store there or in some other combination. But what is important is that you ensure that everybody has access to these things, and everybody has access to the important, to good living conditions. And all of that is somehow done while respecting a certain number of things. And precisely what people agree upon, as long as they agree, it doesn't matter that much, really. Which is why you don't need to come up with a precise list of what you must vote on, and otherwise there's disaster. It's more like, these are the questions, please try to answer them. There's a huge difference. We had... In our biodiversity renewable energy analysis, we had a big analysis on how to engage communes. And of course, communes often vote against photovoltaic or solar projects, but it's partly because it's not their own project. It's some company that says somewhere, well, let's make a very profitable project, let's put it in that commune, and we pay them a few peanuts, and let's try to convince them to vote for it. Well, that doesn't necessarily work. So, I think, I mean, I don't have a conclusion, but we are running out of time. So I have to conclude. Democracy is a process. The democracy is unfortunately not magic, but it's a very powerful process. It's one of these processes like science that is self-correcting. It makes many mistakes, but it's self-correcting, and in time it moves into a good way. So somehow we have bits and pieces of democracy, but we don't have a proper deliberation culture. And then we have all sorts of other things, such as the belief in individualism, consumerism, and many other things like that are not really helping us, that actually democracy could be a very powerful antidote to. So, instead of, or in place of a conclusion, the only thing I can really suggest is try to identify local places where we could bring in some democracy. And we have some tools like the Academic Citizens Assembly, etc. And we could use other tools. It doesn't really matter which tools we use. What is important is to identify an area where you can really make a difference and get started with a few people. So I think that's really the best conclusion we can make. In the end, your topics were all very related, but I think we can leave it at that. Let me actually, instead of saying anything else, let me actually ask you: did you enjoy the exercise?
Yes.
Do you feel you could do something for democracy in the next 6 months somewhere?
I can find you a place, that's for sure.
Many thanks.
Thank you for your participation. We really appreciated it. Thanks.